Hi there, and welcome to New Gun Owner Orientation. My name is John Correa, and I am the founder and owner of Active Self-Protection. And if you're watching this video, it's probably because either you have just bought your first firearm or you're thinking about buying a firearm. And when I first bought my very first firearm, I know that I just didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't know how to find out what I needed to know. And so the purpose of this series is to help you, a new gun owner, to get into this with enough knowledge that you're safe and that you can make smart decisions. Many thanks to MagTech Ammunition for sponsoring today's video. It's the only ammunition that goes through my pistols or rifles and is the best stuff on the range. So the purpose of this series that we are going to be launching, and there are going to be several videos in this, is to be brief for you, but to give you some introduction into firearms. And I have here a firearms case and all those things, and we're going to talk about different types of firearms. We're going to talk about safe storage of firearms. We're going to talk about how to use your firearms and what's the difference between a firearm that you might use for defending your home versus one that you might conceal on your person for concealed carry outside the home. But for now, I want to start off with this idea that says, number one, you are normal. And firearms are normal, and normal people own firearms. You know, I think that sometimes, I know in my world, I was born and raised in a place where firearms were kind of shunned by some people and then really embraced by others. And kind of that, you know, fell along political lines in reality. But I just want to tell you, I don't care what your politics are. You don't have to change your ideology. You don't have to change who you are to become a firearms owner. And so that means if you are on the political left, on the political right, you're in political libertarian, I don't care. That's great. You don't have to embrace everything and force team all these other areas in order to become a firearms owner to protect yourself and your family. I've had a good friend that said, you know what, the only thing we have to have in common is a trigger finger and a life to protect, and I welcome you into the community. That phrase, by the way, guns are normal and normal people use guns, is the kind of trademarked phrase of my friend David Yamane, who is a professor of sociology at Wake Forest University. So it doesn't mean that you had to change things. You are allowed to be you. And I also honor the fact that in some places I have friends who are firearms owners who, man, they really can't tell their friends and loved ones that they own guns because it would cause them social ramifications. So they can't go ask their friends. But you know what? I bet you more of their friends than they think probably own firearms. And I can tell you that from some experience. See, I pastored a church for 14 years, and as part of that, in some parts of the world and in some denominations, a pastor who is into firearms is very, very normal. In other parts, that is very abnormal and could lead to some real social concerns. And so you don't have to tell anybody else that you own firearms. In fact, you can sit here and watch YouTube in your bedroom or your closet or whatever, and that's just fine. I want to educate you because this is a normal thing and you are welcome here. So, of course, I want you to leave comments that let me know what are some of your questions. What are the things that you want to know? What are questions that you might have? And you can email me as well. My email is on the channel and you can email us and I would love to interact with you. Today, that normal people from all walks own firearms, I want to talk to you a little bit about safe handling of firearms. We're going to talk about safe storage of firearms in our next video. But for right now, I want to talk about the safe handling of firearms. And I'm going to talk to you about 3 rules, just 3 rules that are going to drive everything else we do. And those 3 rules are, rule number 1, we always keep firearms pointed in a safe direction when we have them in our hands and when we're in control of them. Rule number 2, we always keep our finger off the trigger until we have made the decision to fire. And rule number 3, we always keep firearms unloaded until they're in use. If we follow those 3 rules, whether we're out at the range, whether we're here in our home, whether we are storing our firearms safely, then our chances and our ability to have a catastrophic accident are nil. And I know for most people, when they get into a situation where they decide to buy a firearm, safety is probably their biggest concern. I will tell you that one of the things that we talk about here is right now, if this firearm is in a case, it's not pointed. So when I have it locked here in its container, take this key out, whatever, I leave it, it's not pointed anymore, it's cased. But the second that I open this case up and the second certainly that I put this gun in my hand, it is now pointed. And so the first thing that I have to do is I always, always, always keep firearms pointed in a safe direction. Now, you're going to hear a lot of people talk a lot of things about what a safe direction is, but I'm going to give you a principle. A safe direction, by its definition, is the direction of least consequence. It's the direction that if, God forbid, the firearm went off unintentionally, that no person would be hurt by that firearm. So it's not pointed at any person that doesn't need a gun pointed at him. And number two, that it would minimize property damage and not damage any critical property. So I will say this. Now, where is a safe direction? Well, that depends on where you are. At the range, when we are out shooting at the range, that might be towards the targets because they have this big dirt berm or a big, crushed rubber berm behind it. But that might not be that direction. Some people think that up is a safe direction. It might be, but it might not be. The ground could be a safe direction unless your feet are there or your little ones. So a safe direction, you have to think. You have to ask yourself, when I pick this firearm up, what direction is safe? Now I can tell you, and I know for sure, that this wall right behind us is made out of block. It's got sheetrock on it, but it's a block wall. So when I pick this firearm up, if I'm pointing that firearm at this wall, well then guess what? It is a safe direction because God forbid if this gun were to go off, it would shoot a bullet into this block wall that would stop it. Now there's a difference between a block wall that will stop a bullet and a sheetrock wall that will not stop a bullet. The walls that are that way, kind of behind the camera, are made out of sheetrock. And if, God forbid, the gun goes off and shoots everybody that way, well, then it'll go through those walls and could hurt somebody. So that's not a safe direction. Now, the camera, you might be thinking that it's pointing at my computer monitor here. So a safe direction is one that also minimizes property damage if the gun were to inadvertently go off. So I'm pointing it at the wall, not at my computer, because I'd rather not shoot my computer. Now, of course, I'm not going to do the other things as well. So rule number 2, we always keep our finger off the trigger until we have made the decision to fire. Now, I want you to see something here. I want you to see the fact that when I say keep my finger off the trigger, what I don't mean is just hovering outside here, because what tends to happen when people get scared is if they grip like this or they get scared, then they can press the trigger inadvertently on this gun. So when we talk about our finger off the trigger, what I want you to do is if you have that gun in hand, your trigger finger should be up here and at least away from the trigger guard. This is the trigger guard here, at least up here and away, and even better if you have the finger flexibility up here on the steel part, the slide, if possible. If not, some people's hands can't do that. But if so, way up here, because if I had a hand that went, it won't get into the trigger and depress the trigger, because I only put my finger on the trigger when I have made the decision to fire. And of course, that would be a very serious thing indeed. The third thing that I do is that I always keep firearms unloaded until they're in use. Now, we're going to talk about the basic operations of a firearm in a future video. But for right now, what I do is I check and see if there's anything inside the chamber or if there's any magazine in the gun. We're going to talk about that in a future video. But I check visually multiple times that this gun that was being stored inside here and not used and not staged for defensive use should be kept unloaded, and this one is. So is following all 3 rules of firearm safety. So I'm going to put that slide down. And again, if I put that gun down, okay, fine. Now I'm going to just give you a real quick thing. Every time I pick a gun up, I check for the 3 rules of firearm safety. So the first thing I do if I'm going to pick a firearm up is I make sure that it's pointed in a safe direction. And I have to think before I pick the gun up, what is a safe direction? So if this gun was pointed in a different direction before I picked it up, I might reorient this case so that when I pick it up and from the time I put my hand on it, it's pointed in a safe direction. Number 2, when I go to pick it up, I'm going to verify and make sure that my finger is off the trigger and high and along the slide. And then the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to verify that it is unloaded because I am handling it but not using it. So if I'm doing that, just to show you again, okay, I get a grip on the gun, my trigger finger is nice and high, I pick it up, it is pointed in a safe direction. I'm going to show you how to lock this slide to the rear in a future video, but for right now, let's just say that happened. I check in the chamber with my eyeballs and with my finger to verify that it's there. I look down here to make sure that it doesn't have any magazine. We'll go through all those in a future video as well. And now I can verify that this gun is unloaded. But even though it's unloaded, I still keep it pointed in a safe direction and keep my finger off the trigger until I've made the determination to fire. If we follow those 3 rules of firearm safety, we will never have a problem. So, today's lesson, welcome to firearms ownership. It's normal for you to have a firearm. I am glad that you are here and I'm here to answer questions for you. Number 2, the rules of safe firearms handling apply to every firearm all the time, and they are 3. Number 1, always keep firearms pointed in a safe direction, and that's the direction of least consequence, the direction where nobody would be harmed if the gun went off, so it's never pointed at a person, and where it would minimize property damage if it were to inadvertently go off. Number 2, to keep it from going off, we're going to keep our finger finger high and off the trigger until we've made the decision to fire. At the very least, we want to be able to see the trigger clearly and not have our finger cover that. But if we can, we're going to get all the way up on the steel slide here, so then that way we have a little bit more margin for success. And number 3, we are going to keep all firearms unloaded until they are in use. And when we follow those, we will do well. We will see you again soon on our next episode of New Gun Owner Orientation.